One more brief presentation before we have our facilitated discussion on strategies of increasing participation, and that brief presentation will come from Dr. Fifa A Rahman from Matahari Global Solutions, and the title of her brief presentation is Future-Proofing Pandemic Preparedness and Response, a comprehensive analysis of the CA Plus and IHR amendments. It's going to be a very exciting but dynamic and brief presentation. So let's please take it away, and you'll have to tell the audiovisual people for the next slide because they don't have,
Thanks very much, Chair, for the introduction. Dr. Moeti, Honourable Ministers, Excellencies, experts, and all gathered here today. I had the very difficult task of distilling an 80-page analysis into 5 minutes. Nevertheless, it's my absolute pleasure to present to you today a very brief executive summary of a comparative analysis of the Pandemic Accord and the IHR amendments, an ongoing exercise that we hope to get more feedback on. Around the room, you may find hard copies of the executive summary, and we understand there are more copies coming, and the full report will follow pursuant to additional consultation with African experts and ministers. Next slide, please. Yep. The presentation focuses on 9 key areas which are considered contentious and focuses on a way forward, taking into account the mandate to prioritize equity, the looming April-May 2024 deadline, and the oft-stated interest in practical and actionable provisions. We also looked at overlaps and opportunities for consensus, the latter of which you will see summarized in the executive summary before you, and in more depth in the full report, which will be released by the end of the year. Next slide, please. A small note on acknowledgements and attribution. Myself as the lead consultant for this project, the editor Ian Jones from Ginger Publishing, and the advisor Professor Helen Rees, who commissioned this report from the University of Witwatersrand. We interviewed 29 experts and country negotiators, but hope to interview more today and the coming days of African country experts, ministers, and negotiators before we launch the full report. Next slide, please. Briefly on the methodology, it combines legal doctrinal analysis, negotiator interviews, and is triangulated with desk reviews from various sources. And this includes academic analyses from the Graduate Institute, for example, and legal and medical journals, media articles, for example, from the Geneva Health Files, delegation proposals, such as the EU INB proposal and the Africa Group proposals, and documented and formatted to show areas of concern expressed by negotiators and opportunities for consensus. Next slide, please. We covered 9 key areas over 80 pages. That is declaration, CBDR, R&D, PABs, and the rest on your screen. And the executive summary document summarizes only the areas of concern and opportunities for consensus. In the larger comparative analysis, we will show anonymized country positions, triangulated with expert analyses and opinion, and therefore provides a clear starting point from which countries can formulate their positions. Next slide, please. We analyzed the difference between treaties and regulations and attempted to draw out legal characteristics of the two based on legal scholarship and legal expert interviews. As can be seen from the slide, treaties are a political signal of priorities for issues where universal adherence will take time and to facilitate multilateral cooperation where domestic law and other policies such as international policy and regulations have failed. Whereas regulations such as the IHR amendments are a first line of defense against health emergencies, pertain to competencies, nomenclature, temporary recommendations, and was not originally designed for the mobilization of financial and human resources, although, as we are informed by legal experts, there is no reason why this could not change. Countries also wanted to know the difference between conventional treaties and framework conventions, which some parties say the Pandemic Accord is more inclined to be. The latter describes a type of treaty that delegates some issues to the development of protocols later on, therefore creates a two-stage process. As the quote on the slide displays, this is usually a more political question rather than a legal one. That is, where some parties cannot reach consensus on particular issues and is therefore delegated to other protocols. Next slide, please. Very briefly, I'm going to describe findings in 3 key areas out of the 9, although we'll be more than happy to set up meetings and will be available to discuss findings in all 9 during this meeting. On common but differentiated responsibilities, negotiators seem to be divided into 3 different groups. Group 1, completely against CBDR in the treaties and the IHR amendments. Supportive of CBDR and language on CBDR must be retained. This is the second group. And third, supportive of CBDR, but doesn't mind a shift in language as long as the principle is reflected. Within the latter 2 groups of countries is a subset of countries that think that CBDR is necessary for the implementation of One Health, pathogen access and benefit sharing, and other areas. Some countries do not believe the principle is transferable from a climate change context, while others believe that CBDR is absolutely essential to ensure robust implementation of pandemic preparedness and response. Next slide, please. Pathogen access and benefit sharing is an extremely difficult area, which one expert said was at the heart of the political bargain of both the IHR and the Pandemic Accord. Some high-income countries seem to be referring to a report by the international legal firm Covington, commissioned by the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers, which states that pathogen access and benefit sharing will result in increased compliance cost, and that they are already spending a lot of money on compliance cost for the Nagoya Protocol. However, there are many ways that PAB's system can work successfully. The WHO International Pathogen Surveillance Network, for example, could operate in tandem with the CA+ PAB system in a similar fashion that the GISRIS operates for influenza under the PIP framework. Furthermore, the Covington report fails to take into account Article 4.4 of the Nagoya Protocol that states where a specialized instrument on PABs is developed, the Nagoya Protocol would no longer apply, and therefore compliance cost would be reduced. And finally, next slide please. Finally, on the section containing the time-bound waivers in the Pandemic Accord and pandemic-related competencies in the IHR, this is, as you know, an area where there are very strong red lines and are likely to remain controversial. High-income countries are stating that IP should only be discussed in WIPO or WTO forums and treaties. Meanwhile, Global South countries told us that they are concerned that they will be forced to agree only to pathogen access and benefit sharing or intellectual property provisions in the Pandemic Accord. However, many HICs have waiver laws incorporated in their own laws. European Council Regulation 2022, for example, especially states that where a government has financed the production of pandemic-related products, they should be able to require licensing of those products and therefore a waiver of the intellectual property covering those products. Many of these waiver laws also require that the order come from a Minister of Health. So the notion that IP is only within the realm of the WIPO or WTO seems to be inconsistent with this fact. As regards waiver-related provisions in the IHR, some are concerned that the inclusion of IP would politicize the IHR and state that the IHR is not intended for these purposes. However, it can be argued that countries having waiver-related positions in their laws and that included in the IHR is a competencies-related issue and therefore is appropriate for the IHR. And the final slide. My 5 minutes is up.
It's more than 5 minutes. Everybody did more than their 5 minutes. But I want these people to be able to take in what you're saying in bite-sized form, and we will finish soon, please.
Yeah. I am available today and tomorrow for discussions with countries. My email is on the slide. And welcome further discussions with all. Thank you very much.
It was a wonderful presentation. The headlines from what would have been a much longer one, I'm sure, but thank you very much indeed for that.